A lot of people know Chabad through the last Rebbe. Very few people know where Chabad started. There was 7 total rabbis of the Chabad movement. Chabad has become the most well-known Chassidic movement. And we're also going to discuss in this section with Chabad problems with the Chabad movement. Chokhmah, Bina and Dat, for those that don't know, Chokhmah is wisdom, Bina is understanding, and Dat is knowledge, was established by Rabbi Zalman Liadi. This was the 3rd generation of the Chassidic movement, because like we said earlier, Chassidim was started by the Baal Shem Tov. So what is Chabad Chassidim? Chabad Chassidim see the intellect as the means through which an individual can affect change in his soul. For example, if one wants to instill love of God in his heart, he must learn about God's greatness, eternity, and constant providence over all of creation. As a result of learning, he will begin to experience love of God. Now I can tell you this is already mentioned by the Rambam, Maimonides, in the Mishneh Torah, in his first book called Hamadah, and he lived 1,000 years ago. None of these movements bring something new. They basically just structure it in a concise philosophy. They surround themselves around a central figure, a Rebbe, and then they spread it throughout Judaism. But many of the ideas that the Chassidim bring, you can find in other works if you've already learned it. They also developed the notion of hitbonenut, which is deep contemplation or meditation. Literally, there's hundreds of books now on Chabad. But their main book is the Tanya, is this book. I've already put the link in the description down below. Who was Rabbi Schneersohn Liadi? He was born in the year 1745 and he lived until the year 1812. And he's the founder, like I said, of the Chabad movement. He was born in Belarus and he was also very active in Belarus, and he died in Liadi in the Ukraine. He is the author of the Tanya. This is the first work that systematically presented the ideas of the Chassidim. He was one of the prominent students of the Maggid. As I said earlier, basically all these Rebbes come from the Maggid. And Rabbi Schneersohn's associates called him the Litvak, which is Jews from Lithuania. And the reason they called Rabbi Schneersohn Liadi the Litvak is because he came from a scholarly region of Lithuania in Belarus. He was considered an absolute genius, extremely knowledgeable in all things Torah. The Maggid told him to write a new version of the Shulchan Aruch, which is called Shulchan Aruch Harav. And that is exactly what happened. And that is also the book that the Chassidim, that the Chabadniks especially study, where obviously the rest of Judaism, the Sephardics and the Ashkenazim, we believe you should only study the Shulchan Aruch that was written by Rabbi Yosef Karo. The reason that the Ramah, who was Ashkenazi, didn't write a new Shulchan Aruch is because he didn't want more than one version. But the Chabad movement broke with this tradition. It's very similar to the Shulchan Aruch, but they do put in obviously their Hasidic ideas and heavily based on Kabbalah, which is not the mainstream Jewish way, which we discussed when we had the class on Kabbalah. So let's get in some of the controversy. Just after Rabbi Schneersohn Liadi published the Tanya, he had fierce opposition. His opponents accused him of treason against the Tsars. The Tsars was the leaders of Russia at that time, and he was imprisoned for 2 months because of that. After his release, however, he increased his dissemination of Hasidic ideas. The next rabbi, the second rabbi of Chabad, is called Rabbi Dovber Schneuri, and he was born in the year 1773 and lived until the year 1827. He's known as the Mitteler, which means middle. The Chassidim speak Yiddish, which is a mix of German and Hebrew. And he was the son of Rabbi Schneersohn of Liadi. This is the theme that I'm also going to try to just point out, is that it goes in a family line. This rabbi served as the Rebbe of Lubavitcher. So Lubavitcher is actually a place in Russia. So that's where the name comes from. Because Chabad is also called Lubavitcher, which is the town that they are originally from. And he later died in the Ukraine. Okay, the next rabbi we're going to talk about, which is the third rabbi in the Chabad movement, is Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. So you'll see a lot of them have the same names. He was more famously called the Tzemach Tzedek. He was born in the year 1789 and lived until the year 1866. He was born in Belarus, and he was the grandson of Rabbi Shneer Zalman of Liadi and the son-in-law of Rabbi Dovber Schneuri, which was the second rabbi. So he basically married the second Chabadnik rabbi's daughter, and you'll see that's also a very common theme. They do marry very close to each other. Like I said, it is like a dynasty with the Chabadniks. And he was the Rebbe of Lubavitch. That's also where he died. We're moving on to the fourth rabbi of the Chabadnik movement, which is Rabbi Shmuel Schneerson. Was born in the year 1834, lived until the year 1882. He was the youngest son of the Tzemach Tzedek, which is the third rabbi. Again, their dynasty vibe. He was born in Lubavitch. He served as the Rebbe there, and he also died there. So the fifth rabbi of the Chabadnik movement is Rabbi Sholom Dovber Schneerson. He was born in the year 1860 and lived until the year 1920. And he was the son of Rabbi Shmuel Schneerson, which was the fourth rabbi. He was born in Lubavitch and served as the rabbi there, and he died in Russia, in Rostov. He also established the Tomchai Tememim Yeshiva in Lubavitch and the Torah's Emes Yeshiva in Hebron, which later moved to Yerushalayim. A lot of these Chassidim, the early Chassidim, not current day Chabad, but the early Chassidim of Chabad did try to resettle the land of Israel. They were heavily involved. And now we're moving on to the next rabbi, the sixth Chabad rabbi, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. He was born in the year 1880 and lived until the year 1950. Was born in Lubavitch, and he was the only son of Rabbi Shalom Dovber, who was the fifth rabbi of Chabad. Served as the Rebbe in Rostov, in Leningrad. He was exiled to Riga in Latvia, and then Otwock, Poland, and then Warsaw, and finally arrived in New York. Because also you'll see with the time of his death, he actually lived through the Second World War with Nazi Germany, and he was in the camps in Warsaw, and he finally arrived in New York. And most people know Chabad for their presence in New York, and he actually established 770, the famous building in New York called 770. Also, what many people don't know, he also established the community that is in Israel called Kfar Chabad, which is a village, it's now a proper town in Israel, and he also supported that village financially. So you hear a lot that the Chassidim, are not for Israel, but when you read the history of Chassidim, they've always been very connected, like any other Orthodox Jews, with the land of Israel. And they've always been trying to settle it, support the settlements of it. So now we're going to move on to the last Chabad Rebbe, who is also called the Lubavitcher Rebbe. His name is Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, which I'm sure almost everyone has heard about. He was born in the year 1902, and he lived until the year 1994. And he's the son-in-law of Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, which was the sixth rabbi. And I'll tell you now after this what is the problem after this. And he was born in Mykolaiv, Ukraine. He studied Torah with his father and studied mathematics and engineering at universities in Berlin and Paris. He escaped the Nazis and came to the United States. He served as a Rebbe for over 40 years in New York, where he died. And one of his main things that he taught was the preparation of the world for the arrival of the Mashiach and the redemption. he heavily emphasized the Messianic era, or also called footsteps of Mashiach, was near, and that it was therefore essential to spread the ideas of the founder of Chassidim, the Baal Shem Tov, and to prepare the people for the coming of the Mashiach. This is what basically made him the most famous, is he sent out emissaries to communities throughout the Jewish world and instructed them to increase Torah study, mitzvot and observance, and awareness of the redemption in these communities. He had mitzvah campaigns, and he did all this to increase the observance of mitzvot, and in particular, like I said, the tefillin trucks, Torah study, family purity, Jewish education, loving one's fellow Jew, putting on a mezuzah, giving charity, keeping the dietary halachot, and the Chassidim have some extra stringencies, which mainstream Judaism does not agree with. Lighting Shabbos candles, and possessing Jewish books in the home, and various other things. There's a lot of things that one can say about the last Chabadnik rabbi. He actually also instituted the daily study of a portion of the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, which we've covered the Rambam plenty times. He was fluent in many languages, devoted much of his time to advising politicians and leaders, both Jewish and non-Jewish, about contemporary issues. So let's quickly go now through some of the controversy, unfortunately, with Chabad. Like we learned, the last Chabad Rebbe was a great tzaddik, and he was very influential throughout the world. Many leaders from many countries came from all over the world to meet him in New York at 770. With all this hype and him constantly talking about the coming of the Mashiach, a lot of the Chabadniks felt that he is the Mashiach, that the Mashiach have come. I've said it in some of my other videos that any Jew that can trace his line back to King David through the father, actually through Jesse, and that is Jewish, can be the Mashiach. He must fulfill certain things. There's certain things that the Mashiach must do, which is world peace and the rebuilding of the temple. Now, when the last Chabadnik rabbi died, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, his Chassidim couldn't process it for two reasons. And that's why I try to emphasize their dynasty principle. They select their next Rebbes based on children. So there needs to be children. And then that child normally becomes the next Rebbe. Or if there's only a daughter, which was the case with Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, only had a daughter. So Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson married his daughter. His daughter's name was Chaya. And that through that connection, the dynasty still travels. And unfortunately, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson had no children. So there is halacha that is in the Shulchan Aruch that if your wife cannot produce children, then you must divorce her. And this is a law in the Shulchan Aruch, because there's a mitzvah, prurvu, the very first mitzvah in the Torah, is to be fruitful and to multiply. The mitzvah is on the man, it's not the obligation of a woman. If you married a wife, God forbid, chas v'shalom, and she cannot produce children, then you should remarry to produce children. You should give this wife a get, and then you should remarry and have children that way. I can tell you, modern sources say, these days there's a lot of technology, there's surrogates. In that way, you're still fulfilling the mitzvah of Pruvu. There's a lot of speculation around, why didn't he divorce his wife? Because he was a very great tzaddik, and, he knew the Shulchan Aruch back to front. So there's a lot of speculation, maybe he himself couldn't have children. So then he has no obligation to divorce his wife if he knows it's a problem with him and not his wife. And in that time, there was enough technology to find that out. After that, then, there is no second Rebbe. There's no Rebbe, like we've learned, from the first Rebbe to the second, to the third. There's always a family line. And because Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson had no children, there's no next rabbi. There's no next Rebbe where the Chabad can rally around. Now, unfortunately, there is a movement, I would say a very big growing movement, which a lot of Ashkenazim Jews as well as the Sephardim, recognize is dangerous to Judaism as a whole, we call them the Yellow Flag Movement. There's a movement within Chabad, and this is not all the Chabadniks, Chas v'Shalom, God forbid, but making a Rebbe a central figure and putting a lot of emphasis on this Rebbe with all the Chassidic ideas of the soul never dies and everything is a spark. There's dangers in that, and that was pointed out by the Vilna Gaon, one of the greatest rabbis that ever lived. One of the dangers is that people can come to worship, God forbid, Chas v'Shalom, can come to worship these Rebbes and see them as semi-divine, as we saw with the Christians. Jesus, when he was alive, he was a Jew, he was a rabbi. He learned in yeshiva, one of the greatest yeshivas that was around at the time. And when he died a normal, regular Jew. Only 300 years later, the Christians made him a god through Paul, Shaul, another Jew. And that is a danger that many people see in Chabad. There's a danger with Chabad currently, with the yellow flags, that they are starting to say a lot of things that's very similar to Christianity. There's now the yellow flags are saying that some speculate if the Rebbe ever died. There's a few of them that says he died and he's coming back, and there's no source of a second coming in Judaism. He's not there, which many people feel they adopted from Christianity. And there's a lot of them that are doing things that is not allowed in Jewish halakha, in Shulchan Aruch. They have pictures of only one Rebbe. Only one of the Chabad Rebbe's picture you will ever see. And you will see it everywhere. In every Chabad house. I'm talking a house of Chabadniks. Every Chabad synagogue, you will find a picture of a dead rabbi. You don't find that in any other synagogue. You don't find it in any other Chassidic stream. You have synagogues which have a lot of pictures of tzaddikim up. But to have only one, it have elements of idol worship. Because in a synagogue, you should be only praying to God. Jews are forbidden to pray to anyone other than God. As soon as you cross that line, then you are idol worshiper. So if you pray to a dead Jew, like Christians do with Jesus, and you are Jewish, then you are idol worshiper. Christians who are born Christians is allowed to do it through a concept called shituv, which means an intermediary, meaning that they can ascribe powers to other beings or elements, as long as they believe there's only one God. For Jews it is absolutely forbidden, not allowed at all. Actually says it in the Torah that God hid the burial site of Moshe Rabbeinu, who gave us the Torah. God gave the Torah to Moshe. Through the hand of Moshe we have the Torah. And it shows you something, that God knew that if people knew where Moshe was buried, they would make it into an idol worship place. And unfortunately, there's a lot of stories around with Chabadniks. I've asked Chabadniks, why do you go to the grave of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson of blessed memory before you get married? So the right answer to give is, we go there to pray in the merit of the tzaddik that's dead. So we pray straight to God in the merit of the tzaddik, because there's a belief that the tzaddik obviously was holy, he's a righteous person, and the place where he's buried also has holiness, because the body in which his neshama was hosted, his soul was hosted, have holiness. So people, this is mainly the Chassidim and a lot of Sephardim, pray at graves of tzaddikim. This is not really mainstream Ashkenazim Jews, but in Sephardic world it's quite prominent, and in Chassidim it's basically everyone doing it. But I have asked a lot of Chabadniks that went there to get engaged, and they phrase it like this: we went there to get permission from the Rebbe to get married. So that's one of the big dangers that many people have asked me about, and I will eventually make a video about Chabad. There are good elements as well as some of these other elements that is creeping in.